Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to, well, being truly well-informed. We try to pack in surprising facts, maybe just enough humor to keep you hooked.
Yeah, hopefully.
And today, we're taking a deep dive into Congress in context. So we've sifted through quite a stack of sources, articles, research, congressional records, all giving us a pretty fascinating peek into what's been happening recently up on Capitol Hill.
And our mission here really is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from all this material.
Right.
We want to help you cut through the noise, understand the latest legislative landscape, and really get what it means, its real-world implications for everyday Americans.
Getting to the what and the why.
Exactly. The what and the why behind the headlines. And we're aiming for a balanced, engaging exploration.
Couldn't have said it better. We promised some surprising facts, clear explanations, and yeah, a balanced view of the legislative work happening right now.
So let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Congress has been, well, incredibly busy. You've got debates ranging from major economic policy stuff all the way to really personal safety concerns.
Yeah, huge range.
We'll start by looking at some of the kind of big legislative highlights that our sources brought to light.
Okay.
So right at the forefront of recent activity, the sources point to something called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, H.R. 4193.
Catchy name.
Right. And it's a pretty substantial piece of legislation, potentially wide-ranging impacts. Now, from the proponent's side, as we see in the materials, they frame it as being about restoring fairness and awarding work. They're championing it for aiming to deliver, lower income tax rates, a larger standard deduction, and an expanded child tax credit.
All things people generally like.
Exactly. The promise is more take-home pay, simpler tax filing for you. And it's also framed as putting kitchen table concerns at the center of policy.
Right, and I saw a mention of incentivizing workforce housing, too, through tax credits.
Yeah, that was in there. A point strongly advocated by Representatives Garcia and Flood, apparently.
Okay, so that's the pro side. But what's insightful here, I think, is how this bill really shows the tension, the push and pull in legislative strategy, because the opponents see it very, very differently.
How so?
Well, Mrs. Barragan, for instance, she described it as making an ugly bill even uglier. Ouch.
Wow. Why?
Primarily because of what she called steeper cuts to Medicaid. And the claim is these cuts are designed to, quote, reward billionaire donors.
Okay, that's a strong accusation. Any specifics?
Yeah, she specifically claimed Kentucky, for example, could lose a staggering $12 billion in Medicaid funding. And she even cited Senator McConnell's rather blunt comment, they'll get over it.
Oof. Okay.
And, this bill isn't just about tax cuts either. It gets tangled up with broader budget talks.
Right.
Critics like Mr. DeSaulnier argue it could potentially cut Pell Grants, which are, vital for low-income college students.
To pay for the tax breaks.
That's the argument. Financing tax breaks for the wealthy. He actually described it as, quote, one of the largest transfers of multi-generational wealth in history. Wow. So this kind of bill, an omnibus bill they call it, where they bundle lots of different things together, it's always a high-stakes gamble, isn't it?
Seems like it.
It's often used to push through major policy changes. But like we're seeing here, it risks, well, buckling under the weight of all the internal disagreements, even within the same party sometimes.
So that raises a big question, right? With these really strong competing stories about the same bill, how does something like this actually move through the process?
Well, the sources indicate that despite those ambitious goals, the bill itself is described as, quote, buckling under its own weight, just like we said, because of those internal Republican disagreements.
So it's hitting roadblocks.
Seems so. And Senator Durbin, he went even further. He accused the bill of being designed to, quote, cut health care for 16 million Americans, decimate rural hospitals, and kill nearly 1 million jobs.
Okay, so definitely a major flashpoint in Congress right now. Huge division.
Absolutely.
All right, so moving from the complexities of tax policy, our sources also take us to a deeply personal issue, gun safety. We're looking at the Safe Storage Saves Lives Act. This was introduced by Representatives DeLauro, Frost, and Kelly.
Okay, what does it do?
This bill specifically mandates every firearm seller to include a gun lock or gun safety device every single time a gun is sold. Every single time.
A universal requirement.
Right. And the motivation behind it, it's heartbreaking, really. It stems from a real-world tragedy. A 9-year-old in Oakland County who was seriously injured after he was accidentally shot.
Oh, awful.
Yeah, and the sponsors argue, that keeping firearms out of the hands of our children should not be a partisan issue.
You'd hope not. And yet what's so striking reading through these sources is just how stark that philosophical divide still is, even on something like gun safety.
Yeah, how so?
Well, you see the contrast when you look at other legislative efforts, like there was a Republican reconciliation bill mentioned, that special budget process that can bypass the filibuster in the Senate.
Right. Needs fewer votes.
Exactly. Well, this bill, according to Senator Durbin, who criticized it, reportedly removes taxes and regulations on certain rifles, shotguns, and gun silencers. Even though, as he pointed out, guns are tragically the #1 cause of death for American children and teens. So it just highlights how far apart Congress really is on the fundamental approaches to gun policy.
Very different philosophies at play there. Okay, so from gun safety, the sources then take us into the, well, often contentious world of immigration policy, some surprising new bills popping up.
Always on that topic.
Definitely. One that really stands out is the Special Interest Alien Reporting Act of 2025. That's H.R. 275.
Okay, special interest alien reporting. What does that mean exactly?
So this bill requires the Secretary of Homeland Security to publish on a monthly basis the number of special interest aliens encountered attempting to unlawfully enter the United States.
And special interest aliens. Remind us.
Typically, these are individuals from countries or regions that the U.S. government has identified as having, particular national security concerns, often related to state sponsors of terrorism.
Got it. So who's pushing for this?
Representative Green of Tennessee is a key proponent. He argues this bill is crucial for, well, transparency, accountability, and oversight.
Okay.
He noted an unprecedented number of special interest aliens from China, Iran, and Russia during the current administration, and he also stated that federal law enforcement actually supports the measure.
Interesting. But there must be opposition, right? What's the counterargument?
There is. Representative Correa of California argued pretty strongly against it. He said this bill is actually not good for national security.
Why not? Seems counterintuitive.
His reasoning was that making this specific information public would effectively give bad guys around the world real-time updates on DHS operations and targeting, like handing them intel.
I see the concern there.
Yeah. And he also suggested it's, quote, just Republicans' latest attempt to give the Trump administration another anti-immigrant tool so that they can continue to do the fear-mongering.
So a political motivational edge there, too. What happened with this bill? H.R. 275.
Well, the outcome reported in our sources is that it was passed in the House. The vote was yeas 246, nays 160.
Passed the House. Okay. Still needs the Senate, of course.
Exactly. Another significant bill related to immigration that came up is the DUI deportation bill, H.R. 875.
DUI deportation. Sounds pretty straightforward.
That's how Mr. Moore of Alabama introduced it. He called it a simple, common-sense bill that says, if you are a guest in our country and you drive drunk, you should, in fact, be deported.
Okay. Did he provide context?
He did. He presented some pretty compelling statistics to, underscore the problem. Drunk drivers are involved in 31% of all crash deaths, killing roughly 11,000 people every year.
Stark numbers.
Yeah. And he even cited specific, tragic examples, fatal incidents involving undocumented individuals who had multiple DUIs, cases in Florida and Colorado.
Okay, so that's the case for it. What about the arguments against, if we connect this to the bigger picture?
Representative Raskin offered some strong counter-arguments. He stated that this bill actually does little or nothing to solve the broader drunk driving problem in the U.S.
How so?
He noted that existing law already provides for deportation in serious DUI cases. And he also cautioned that this bill, as written, could potentially render deportable people who never drove drunk at all, maybe sweeping too broadly.
So unintended consequences, potentially. Did he suggest alternatives?
Yeah, he proposed solutions that target drunk driving more directly, like compulsory ignition interlock devices for all convicted drunk drivers, breathalyzer things you need to use to start the car.
Right. Are those common now?
They're currently only mandatory in 31 states, apparently, so not universal.
And the status of this DUI deportation bill?
Our sources indicate it advanced pretty significantly through the House. It was poised for a final vote. It was ordered to be engrossed and read a third time, and the record shows the question was on passage of the bill, with a demand for the yays and nays. That usually implies it passed later in the record.
Okay, another one passed the House then.
Seems like it. And, beyond these really high-profile, often debated bills, there's just a tremendous amount of crucial work happening more quietly in committees.
Absolutely, the engine room, really.
Exactly. These are the sort of foundational pieces of how the government actually operates day to day. Like, the Committee on Appropriations was marking up the legislative branch appropriations bill for FY 2026. That's the budget for Congress itself.
Important plumbing.
Right. And the Committee on Agriculture, their subcommittee on general farm commodities, risk management, and credit, held a hearing called Our Review of the U.S. Grain Standards Act. Super important for our food supply chain, but probably not making headline news.
No, but absolutely vital work.
So, okay, beyond the specific legislation, these sources also give us a real kind of pulse check on Congress. You see everything from deeply solemn moments to really intense ideological clashes.
Yeah, the human side of it, too.
Yeah, definitely. One particularly somber moment highlighted was the condemnation of the just awful, brutally murdered former Minnesota Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman, and her husband, Mark.
Yes, that was terrible news.
And also the life-threatening injuries suffered by Senator John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette, all in what Mr. Emmer described on the floor as a politically motivated attack.
Just tragic. And it really underscored the profound human cost behind some of these political divisions, didn't it?
It really did.
And it led to this powerful call for unity, a rejection of politically motivated violence. I was struck by the words from Melissa and Mark's children that were shared.
What do they say?
Hope and resilience are the enemy of fear. Love your neighbors. Treat each other with kindness and respect. Just incredibly moving and a stark reminder of the personal stakes involved.
Powerful words. Absolutely. And speaking of maybe less tragic, but still huge challenges, let's delve deeper into that always present fiscal responsibility debate.
Yes, the budget battles.
Senator Menendez was making the argument that the majority of the debt run-up over the last 20 years has come from the Republican side of the aisle. He specifically pointed to the costs of wars and tax cuts.
It's always a point of contention, where the debt comes from, but it's maybe more crucial just to grasp the sheer scale of the fiscal picture we're facing now.
Go on.
Well, one way to think about the federal government at its core, it's like an insurance company with an army. And the baseline spending that's projected, it's just daunting. We're talking $86 trillion over the next 10 years.
$86 trillion. That's hard to even comprehend.
It is. And get this, an estimated 60 to 65% of that is just going to interest payments on the national debt we already have.
Just interest. Wow.
Yeah, which raises an important question. What about the long-term challenges? The ones that always seem to get pushed down the road?
Like Social Security and Medicare.
Exactly. We're looking at, according to these sources, an 11% cut coming in the Medicare Trust Fund in 2033, and a 23% cut coming in Social Security checks in that same year.
2033 isn't that far away.
It's not.
Yeah.
And that could lead to real senior poverty. And here's something surprising. Immigration, despite what you sometimes hear, is not modeled to solve this problem.
Really? Why not?
Largely due to a projected flattening of wage growth in the future. So it's not the silver bullet some might hope for.
Man. And it sounds incredibly frustrating trying to find solutions that actually gain traction. The sources mentioned something like $1.76 trillion of savings identified through Medicare Advantage modernization.
Yes, a huge potential saving.
That apparently has zero co-sponsors in Congress right now, just sitting there.
Zero. It's quite something. And there are even these things called forgotten funds. The official term is total discretionary balances subject to rescission, which amounts to basically $500 billion just sitting idle from previous appropriations. Money that was approved but never spent.
$500 billion just sitting there.
Apparently so. And this difficult environment, it often leads to fights over the scorekeeper, that's the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, and whether his numbers are accurate.
Right, arguing about the ref.
Exactly. The sources reveal challenges in getting bipartisan efforts going, with some lawmakers just dismissing CBO numbers if they're politically inconvenient. It shows how much of the debate isn't just about the numbers themselves, but about who controls the narrative around the numbers.
Fascinating and a bit depressing. Okay, let's look beyond our borders for a moment. There were significant concerns expressed in our sources about U.S. foreign policy, too.
Several areas.
One debate seemed to center on the previous administration, the Trump administration, cutting funding for something called ready-to-use therapeutic food, or RUTF. This came from a Rhode Island, Georgia perspective in the record.
RUTF, that's used to treat severe malnutrition, especially in children.
Right. And the concern raised was that this cut allowed adversaries, particularly China, to step into the void and basically extend their influence in places where this aid was needed.
Interesting geopolitical angle there. Meanwhile, the Senate was taking some strong stances. They expressed support for United States and Israeli military strikes on Iran in a resolution, Israel 7.
So putting the Senate on record favoring military action.
Essentially, yes. And this comes amid really grave concerns about Iran's non-compliance with nuclear safeguards. An IAEA report mentioned in the sources stated its stockpile of highly enriched uranium is now sufficient for approximately 9 nuclear weapons.
9, that's alarming.
Definitely escalates international tensions.
And that seems to have led to a push, particularly from Senator Kaine, to enforce the War Powers Act.
Right.
Because of a perceived no coherent strategy, no endgame, no plan regarding U.S. armed forces being involved in hostilities against Iran, it signals a real growing unease within Congress about how the executive branch is handling these foreign engagements without perhaps enough congressional input.
A classic separation of powers debate, really.
No.
But it wasn't all conflict, was it? There was a more bipartisan push on Bosnia.
That's right. A strong push to codify sanctions through the upholding the Dayton Peace Agreement through Sanctions Act.
Okay.
The goal is to address threats to the peace, security, stability, or territorial integrity of Bosnia. And this effort, supported by Senator Daines, among others, shows that even in today's polarized Congress, you can still find common ground on some international issues.
Good to hear.
Now, shifting gears again to social and cultural issues. Our sources marked the 3-year anniversary of the overturn of Roe v. Wade, which happened June 24, 2022, with that Dobbs decision.
A landmark shift.
Absolutely. And since then, as noted by Senators Hyde-Smith and Daines, 13 states have implemented laws to protect life starting at conception, and 19 states total have enacted pro-life laws. So a real continued shift in state-level policy.
And the Supreme Court weighed in again recently, too, right? In Medina v. Planned Parenthood.
Yes. What was that about?
That decision affirms states' rights to decide how their Medicaid dollars are spent. Essentially meaning states aren't forced by federal law to fund the abortion industry through Medicaid.
Okay. And there were also concerns noted about the abortion pill.
Yeah, mifepristone.
Yeah.
Concerns raised about the Biden administration removing certain safety precautions associated with the chemical abortion pill, which further intensifies this whole debate.
Okay. On the other side of the coin, though, a resolution was introduced expressing support for the designation of June 26 as LGBTQI+ Equality Day. That's SRES 306.
Oh, okay.
This resolution references the Obergefell v. Hodges marriage equality case, but it also emphasizes the ongoing need for actual statutory reforms, laws passed by Congress beyond just court decisions, to ensure full equality.
So acknowledging progress, but saying more legislative work is needed.
Exactly. And just to show the sheer variety of things that make it onto the House floor,
Point down.
our sources even included a rather unexpected debate involving
Cookie Monster.
Cookie Monster. Seriously.
Believe it or not, one representative apparently presented the beloved Sesame Street character as an example of, quote, left-wing wokeism and a, quote, great threat to democracy.
You're kidding.
Nope, implying it was a reason to cut public funding for, presumably, public broadcasting or something similar.
Wow. Okay. That certainly adds unique flavor to the debates, doesn't it?
A unique flavor indeed. But, it's really important to remember that so much of Congress's work, the kind that maybe doesn't make the national news cycles,
involves recognizing individuals and celebrating local impacts. These might seem small compared to, massive budget bills, but they really show the breadth of what Congress does and how connected members are to their home communities.
Absolutely. Our sources were full of these examples, weren't they?
They really were.
Yeah, we saw recognitions for people like Michael Greenlee. He was honored for his dedication to veterans care, championing legislation like the Sergeant Ted Grubbs Mental Health Care for Disabled Veterans Act.
Great work.
And his wife, Mariah Greenlee, was also celebrated as an exceptional director of operations in a congressional office. Then there was Melinda Woodhurst, a veterans service officer in York County.
What'd you do?
Recognized for fundraising, for a new van to transport veterans, and for streamlining the VA driver certification process. Real practical help.
Fantastic.
We saw Sister Teresa Lynch celebrated on her retirement, a teacher who did impactful work improving the lives of incarcerated parents through a program called Get on the Bus. Yoshio Nakamura, a World War II veteran who actually endured internment during the war, was honored on his 100th birthday.
Incredible.
And, of course, Frederick W. Smith, the founder of FedEx, also a decorated Marine veteran, celebrated for his life and achievements.
Yeah.
These recognitions really illustrate how deeply connected congressional offices are to their communities. They deal with this huge range of issues, grand and small. It's really the human face of all this legislative work.
It really is. So, okay, pulling this all together, what does this all mean for you, the listener? And what should you maybe keep an eye on moving forward?
Well, first, it's just important to remember that bills like that DUI deportation bill or the Special Interest Alien Reporting Act,
Right.
just because they pass one chamber, the House in this case,
Right.
they still need to navigate the other chamber, the Senate, to actually become law. It's a long process.
Good point. And that one big, beautiful bill act.
Still very much up in the air.
Yeah.
Those ongoing, really contentious debates mean its final form, its overall impact are still very uncertain.
And you mentioned a specific vote coming up.
Yeah, that War Powers Act vote, SJ Res 59, related to Iran, that was scheduled for vote on June 27, 2025, according to the source material. So that'll be a key indicator of where Congress stands on military engagements abroad.
Something to watch.
Definitely. And then, looking broader, those continuing fiscal challenges, those looming deadlines for the Medicare and Social Security trust funds. They're absolutely critical.
The big ones.
The big ones. It raises that huge question. How will Congress address these issues without, as some in the sources worry, doubling U.S. sovereign debt over the next decade? It's a massive generational challenge that really demands serious bipartisan attention.
It really does.
Yeah.
And then there was that whole discussion around central bank digital currency, a CBDC.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. And it highlights this growing and I think increasingly urgent debate about privacy versus government control. Well, some voices in our sources framed it pretty starkly, calling it an existential threat to Western civilization. Whether you agree or not, it's definitely a big idea with potentially huge implications for your financial future, how money works.
Definitely something to keep track of.
And we also saw that ongoing debate over agency rulemaking, like the IRS rules on digital asset reporting or the National Park Service rules on America 250 events.
Things that maybe fly under the radar.
Often they do. But these actions show the really important behind-the-scenes work of federal agencies, how they actually implement the laws Congress passes. And that can have significant direct effects on your everyday life or how whole industries operate.
Good point.
Yeah.
And finally, there are bills like the Promoting Resilient Supply Chains Act, ESTA 257.
Right, looking ahead.
Yeah, it points to this proactive effort to protect critical industries and emerging technologies. Things like nanotechnology, robotics, semiconductors, protecting them from future shocks like pandemics or geopolitical crises.
It shows a kind of forward-looking approach to national security and economic stability, which impacts everything from, the cost of goods on the shelf to job creation down the line.
So ultimately, navigating this complex landscape, your engagement is really key, isn't it?
Absolutely.
If you want to dive deeper into any of these issues we talked about, the Congressional Record itself, it's public.
Yeah.
And platforms like Congress.gov are just excellent resources. You can track legislation, check vote counts, even read the full text of the bills.
Yeah, Congress.gov is great. And we'd also really encourage you to contact your representatives. The speeches we discussed today, they're often direct appeals to constituents.
That's true.
It underscores that their offices really are open for feedback, and your voice actually does matter. You can usually find contact info easily on Congress.gov or just their official websites.
So keep an eye out for upcoming hearings or votes on these issues, like what happens next with the DUI bill or those ongoing budget talks.
And remember, too, there are so many ways to participate in democracy beyond just voting. You can support local community initiatives. You can engage with advocacy groups on issues you really care about.
Whatever it might be.
Right, whether it's veteran services, gun safety, LGBTQI+ rights, fiscal policy, you name it. Or even just staying informed through reliable sources, like Melissa and Mark Hortman's children so powerfully put it.
Remind us again.
The best way to honor our parents' memory is to do something, to make our community just a little better for someone else. I think that's just a powerful call to action for all of us, really.
It truly is. Well, that brings us to the end of this particular deep dive into Congress in context. We really hope you feel maybe a little more informed, perhaps a little less overwhelmed by it all.
Yeah.
and maybe even a lot more curious about how our government works.
Indeed. From the massive complexities of national debt all the way down to recognizing local heroes, Congress is just this vibrant, incredibly complex ecosystem.
It really is.
And it reminds us that while the debates up there are often grand and abstract, their impact is always deeply personal. It echoes in communities right across the country. And that ultimately is what truly matters, isn't it? How these decisions shape the lives of real people, just like you.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring and stay informed.